Okay. All right, good stuff. Thanks for joining us for episode number 2 of Strength 4 or the Strength 4 discussion. Today we're continuing on with the conversation of rugby, and excited to have a new coach join us to bring us a different look, different perspective on a new position. As always, joining me today is a good friend, good mentor, Ed Costner. Ed, how's things been going since our last discussion?
Actually, really good.
And stuff. I know we've been chatting. You've been kind of getting back into your routine with the gym and everything. So,
I know, yeah.
always good for us to stay on the routine ourselves. So, as I mentioned today, we're going to last time we talked about the loose head prop, so we're going to kind of balance it out and switch to the backs today. Talk about Scrumhalves specifically, and joining us again from the last one is Coach Eamon Hogan. And joining him on the rugby side of the discussion is Coach Paul Barford, and we'll actually discuss his accolades, his resume here in a bit. But just a reminder, Coach Hogan, right, very established, very well educated, and successful coach in his own right, and actually does have a bit of overlap in coaching experience with Coach Barford, not just with the Ohio Aviators, but also just throughout USA Rugby. And actually, Eamon, I'll throw it over to you to introduce us. You know him far better than any of us, so I'll let you introduce Coach Barford.
Thanks, Justin. Coach, how are you doing? Coach, you okay? All happy?
Well, it depends what you say about me.
As always, wait for your moment.
I wait for my moment.
So hopefully this is going to start working. Here we go. So I've known Coach Barford since 2005, where we had a conversation where we knew quite a few people in common, because I was working part-time for Leicester Tigers at the time. And as you can see, Paul was a former player for Leicester Tigers. So we have a lot of mutual friends in common. Over that time, Paul has been probably the preeminent voice in USA age grade programming, with people like Salty Thompson, Sean O'Leary, really being the guts of the age grade program when it didn't really have any funding, any organization. And Paul was driven and motivated to make sure youth development reached the solid heights it did up to this point. And many of the players that are now world famous within MLR and around the world were coached at probably one time or another by Paul. So he's a hugely popular and well-known coach. I don't know why that's not working. That's weird. Oh, here we go. Even though Paul and I knew each other previously, he was my head coach in Ohio in the first incarnation of professional rugby in America, which was pro. Paul was head coach of the Ohio Aviators, and myself, Paul Holmes, and Tom Rooney really worked closely together to make that program so successful that out of the 5 teams that played that event, the Ohio Aviators still exist, thanks to Tom Rooney and Taylor Howden and a few others. So as far as legacies go, that's one for Paul, really. He drove it and he made it hugely successful. And my favorite moment was when asked at the end of the season, would they come back and play for the Aviators? There wasn't one dissenting voice. Every single person said they would come back. Sadly, events got away from us, but Paul was a major reason for that success. It should also be known that Paul is a coach educator for World Rugby. And of course, he's a preeminent voice in coaching and player education with USA Rugby prior to their current travails. They'd be very wise to bring him back in once things start up and running again. In this episode, we're going to talk about Scrumhalves, as Justin quite rightly mentioned. As you see on the screen, this is for the strength and conditioning people watching. This is a position indicated by the arrow. We'll go into a little bit more detail about what that actually entails. But I think, the thing that we want to get across really is that it's a role that is so vitally important to a team's progress around the field. But the way they behave and the way they act, they somewhat get misinterpreted, or it's a true reflection of who they are when you look at this cartoon. And that is the very definition of a scrum half. He walks around the field like a little general, screaming and shouting at everybody. I should declare an interest here. My son is an angry scrum half, but he is 6'4". So, but he is short. He is very, very angry young man. And I don't know if you played scrum half, Paul, but I seem to recall in a practice match you doing it a couple of times, and a litany of abuse followed. But yeah, it was very, very good. So, so there you go, Justin. That's the introduction for Coach Barford. Did that meet with your approval, Coach, or you want to come back at me?
No, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the debate, to be honest.
Fantastic.
There we go. Well, before speaking of debate, before we get too far into the scrum half, and one of the big reasons why we certainly wanted to invite you in for this conversation, Coach, is following our first presentation with the loose head. You actually called me on a particular point that was made during that conversation about the line out. So if you would, I'd love for you to let's kind of revisit that a little bit. And I think this image in particular was one that you were kind of referencing. So I'd love for you to kind of go back and share what your thoughts were on that.
Sure. And there was one for Graham and for Ed. During your conversation, Graham mentioned he didn't recall any time where you're lifting things in the gym where you look skyward. And he was referring to this picture of lifting in the line out. And I thought about that for quite a while, and maybe that is typical in a gym situation, but in a fluid motion during a game and when people are moving around and stuff, I think it's very weird that he would have said that. Because I think unless you are so confident that you know what the jumper is doing and what the opposition are doing, how could you not physically look up? So I also thought about it from another point of view is, as you lift anything skywards, do you automatically, is it just a reaction that you naturally look up? But this is a question for you and Ed. And the other thing was, I thought about perhaps, could you train yourself maybe to lift in the line out blindfolded? How would that affect the way you lifted? So there was a lot of different aspects to that, just that one comment about when lifting, do you look up? So that's kind of how our conversation started, Ed. What do you think? What do you think about those comments?
Well, I think that you're kind of spot on when you're talking about the difference between the gym and the field. Nowhere in the comment was, in the gym, do you look up? And you don't look up in the gym. And I'll use for power clean, a press, any kind of pressing movement, you get taught to tuck your chin down, because if your chin's up, you're going to smack yourself in the chin. Smack yourself in the chin, you hit yourself in the nose, you're going to break something. Break teeth, break your nose, split your chin wide open. So you, as a weightlifter or as a lifter in the gym, you get taught to tuck your chin back, drive the bar up and through. Now I use log press a lot of times for my big boys up front, just because of the mobility and everything else. And there you will have to get your head out of the way, look up. But if you lift your head too high in the air in the gym with the weight, because that weight is, the bar is obviously different than than lifting a player, that bar is going to slide back over its center, or your center of gravity. So it's going to try to line back up with the hip. That's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to get it to curve back. You're not leaving it sitting out in front of the body. You're bringing it back over. Otherwise you'd be chasing it. So that's the difference between in the gym and on a pitch. use a med ball for, the heavier med ball for clean and a press and a release and everything else. But yeah, I mean, you're spot on with the assumption that you can't, if you're lifting a line out, you have to look up. But if you look up too much, you get the guys bowing their head back, that lower back is going to arch and you're going to be weak. You're going to get your hips out. You're going to get your hips out in front of your shoulders. You're going to look and get that inverted C looking position with your body, and you end up getting hurt.
So I have another question for that, and that's a great photo to kind of use, because typically you almost form a triangle when lifting,
right?
With a front and back lifter. But in the past, I've heard many S&C people talking about, well, it's actually a stronger lift if you can get that jumper more vertical to the back lifter, because he's pushing up
He's got
more vertical.
He's got much better grip and being able to push up and be able to apply force up. Maybe having the front lifter just balance and keeping him up in the air as well.
So are we lifting incorrectly by forming that triangle, or should we perhaps try more to lift in a vertical line with an assister? I mean, this is just theoretical, huh? I mean, Damon can weigh in on this too. He's a line out man. But it's something that I don't know how much we've actually addressed. The mechanics of lifting. It seems like when we started lifting, we went one way, form a triangle, push him out like a tube of toothpaste, squeezing him and sending him up, and that was it. So I've been kind of curious.
It was more to do with, I'll give the example, because when we worked together in Ohio, we were fortunate to have some really, really good line-out people there. And the back lifters would always be the secure. And we try and push as close to the back lifter as possible before going up. So the technical side is correct from that point of view. The looking up part was debated really when I first got there. And the actual deciding factor on whether we looked up or not was how fast you wanted the ball off the top of the lineup. If you remember, we changed the game plan 3 or 4 weeks into the season. And we went to a different way of playing, and we decided to utilize the space around the field. Apologies, I appreciate this is an SSC podcast, but it'll make sense in a moment. We decided that we would play the ball off the top of the lineup quickly, nearly 90% of the time when we were outside the 22, wherever we were in the field. We wanted to make sure that we could get the ball as wide as possible, as fast as possible, and get our very, very fit back of the line out there. So what we worked on was speed getting them up in the air. It was actually a speed game, and it was up 1, 2 down, and it was trained that way, drilled that way. I mean, it was drilled to start with, and then the players took charge of it and they ran with it. The reason we never looked up was that it was just get him up quickly, bring him down quickly, and while he was in the air, when they brought him down, we were looking at the opposition to see if they would sack him or pull him away. And the person that would be in charge of that would be the guy, the front lifter. So he wouldn't be looking up. Now, obviously, technically is absolutely correct. Coach Barford is correct. It is a very complex subject, and it comes down to the game plan, the subjectivity of the lift, the speed of the lift. What do you want from the lift? Are you going to bring it down? And are you going to bring the ball back down from the air and put it down and then pass it out? Are you going to do a driving maul? Are you going to do a move around the front of the back of the lineup? These are all technical issues around lineup. But going back to the point that the coach made, the decision to look up is correct. We very rarely looked up because we went for a speed, and it was up and bring him back down again, whether he had the ball or not. And because we decided, and we worked so hard on getting him up and out, that was the ideology behind the not looking up. Now, Graham's view was limited. Sorry, Coach, you want to say something?
Well, I was going to actually just carry on. I wanted to ask another strength and conditioning.
Yeah,
question.
Coach Smith, when he was on here, he was heavily influenced by his training as a Scrum coach. He believes that the tower of power position that we talked about on the last webinar, which was about the chin in a neutral position, not looking up, not looking down, something that you just mentioned, Dave, but it's the neutral position is the best way to put someone up in the air. It strengthens the whole, it starts the strengthening of the core. I don't want to speak for Graham. He can speak for himself, but that was where he came from. But Graham's view, because it was mostly Graham's view last time, because he was the guest, I was the Graham whisperer. Pretty much like now, really, I'm the Coach Barford whisperer. But that's basically what it was, is that's our view, but Coach Barford's view is correct. So for instance, on defense, we would look up.
So my question to Justin and Ed is, when you lift with your arms wide apart, because you're lifting two legs, right? Or a backside, are you in a stronger position if you did the same thing by closing your hands and lifting one leg? You could get the same boost, you get the same height if you're strong enough. Which would be stronger?
Which are you, sorry, Coach? Just to clarify,
Sorry?
the front lifter,
No,
the front, or both of them,
both of them. So yeah, if you lift on one leg
at the front and the back,
and your arms are closed, well, you could do front or back. You could have one lift in, just the two at the front.
Oh, I see.
And one behind.
Gotcha.
I'm just kind of curious that, are you in a strong position the closer you get together to boost up one leg, or are you in a strong position to boost two legs up?
I think for lifting a person, you're going to be stronger, a little bit wider. If you're too narrow, your elbows are going to stay in. They're not going to come out and push out. They're going to stay in here. If you get guys with thicker shoulders, especially your front row boys with the thicker shoulders, a little bit less mobility, they're not going to be able to get their hands in close enough to grab one leg. And then you're looking for timing, trying to get two people to grab one person like that from the backside. That's just asking for a little bit of disaster.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the safety issue, which is paramount. I'm just purely curious from a lifting point of view, what would be stronger or quicker? I mean, half the time people put their sausages on, as you can see in this picture, or whatever you call them, what part of the country, and then they don't use them for lifting anyway. They either go below them or above them. So
yeah.
So I was just curious for purely from a lifting point of view.
Sure.
I mean, we discuss a lot about line out, moves and some technique, but I don't know how much, as you said, I don't know how much discussion there's actually been on, or how much movement there's been. As are there teams out there who lift in a dramatically different way? I'm not sure.
Not sure.
I'm actually going to.
The wider you put your hands out, the shorter your arms are going to be too.
That's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, do we need to be looking for people with very long arms?
Yeah, and most of your guys from the front row lifting not going to have really long arms.
They're not. They're going to be lower to the ground. But that's another conversation altogether.
Yeah. No, for sure. Well, definitely wanted to revisit that one, because again, it was an interesting point that you brought up, Coach Barford, and appreciate the added conversation there. So yeah, now back to the scrum half. We'll kick it over. And by the way, I know we touched on this in our first discussion, how much this really truly is kind of like a preseason meeting between the head coach or the sports coach and the strength coach. The point that we just brought up about two different coaches, the same concept in terms of the lineouts, but two schools of thought. Definitely something that strength coaches are going to face all the time. As the sport coaches change, you've got to deal with kind of those small little changes, little tendencies along the way. So good stuff. But yeah, for the scrum half, we'll kick it over to Eamon and Coach Barford.
I'm not sure this is working for me, Justin, but we'll see. Oh, it should be all right. Here we go. Right, we're off. Okay, Coach. So we're looking at just a simple why is that one? That's weird. I'm going to have to go down the end of it. We're looking at just overall attributes to start with. There's a few hints on the screen there. By all means, refer to the screen. But essentially, a scrum half needs to have a certain mindset, which is obviously isn't on there. Certain mental attributes to play the position. But because this is a strength and conditioning webinar, what are your generalized thoughts on what you would look for in a good scrum half?
Well, I think because we're going to start it off with the strength and conditioning part, obviously the speed and the fitness part can certainly be worked on by the strength and conditioning coach. And I think really that 0 to 20, that fast kind of twitch, acceleration to break away from the base is paramount for a scrum half. Yeah. I'm not too worried about technical stuff like kicking because I actually banned it for some teams. As you well know.
I do, correct.
The consistent, accurate delivery, I think that comes under the purview of the strength and conditioning coach too. Because I think what happens a lot is we don't place enough emphasis on foot placement of the scrum half. When he actually gets to a breakdown or when he goes to pass, the mechanics of it, their feet are in the wrong place, which causes a lot of what I call over rotation in the pass. They block themselves as they pass, rather than their foot leading, so they can actually kind of follow their pass along the line. I think a lot of those quick foot movements can be worked out in the gym pre-season. And then I brought up that thing. I wrote it down because just in case I'd forgotten, didn't know how to spell it. I put fast hands, and then I put down reaction time and testing reaction time, and then mental chronometry, which is just a fancy word of reaction. And there's similar tests you can do for reaction time and speeding it up. You can do mental tests, the Higgs test, Metzler's rotation test, which is where you get an object and try and fit it into another object. That's kind of what you can do, at home. Sure. But for the coaches out in the field or in the gym, so many different reaction tests, just turning your back to the scrum half turning his back to a ball or a certain set of circumstances and see how he reacts to it, and seeing how quickly he can do it, visual identification of stuff. As far as their strength, I've actually put something, I'm not quite sure, but I remember Ed in the last podcast talking about grip and strength in the lower arms, and which obviously you'd need for passing. Although you use a lot of legs, you do use a lot of hands. And a lot of times, one of the reasons they can't pass off their left hand or pass both ways is because they're underdeveloped actually in their arms. Yeah, correct. Practice enough. So right. If we start off as that as a premise for a conversation,
it's interesting.
Let's go from there.
Sorry, Coach. It's interesting that you mentioned about footwork, because when you've been a coach for a number of years, I mean, you've been a coach longer than me and more experienced than me. You tend to hear that there's evolutions in the way things are thought, and they always come back to the start again. So you've been a coach a while when you've heard the same thing come up again. One of the things is you're supposed to, when you run up to a ball as a scrum half, is that you have to have, so if you're passing to the left, you've got to have your right foot forward so you don't pass over your right leg or your left leg, and the opposite is true. And then a few years ago, it was promoted that a scrum half should come in with both feet parallel, so it opens up both sides of his body. And that changed again when it came down to pattern play. So again, from an S&C point of view, just as a comment, you'll have heard various things over the years, and you think you've got a hang of this, and you've worked it out. And as an S&C coach, you're thinking, this is going to be great. I've got this now. I've really got this. It's going to go well. And then the coach comes back in and changes it. That is not a reflection on you as the S&C coach. That's a reflection on the new thoughts in the game, and maybe the new coach not being comfortable with their own thoughts on the game, and that they're willing to go with the crowd. unfortunately, the whole organization gets sucked into that, including the SSC staff. Okay, so we're going to move to.
Can I just go back to?
Sorry, Coach. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Coach. Yeah.
And I don't prescribe this for Justin or Ed, but boxing, the way they teach footwork for boxers, having watched Rocky 3, I mean, I don't necessarily think you have to chase a chicken or anything, but getting speed and the way you move your feet coming into, I think there's a lot of stuff you could get from boxing technique of how you move quickly around a ring. Even, I can remember some great Scrumhalves in the past who constantly moved their feet like a boxer at the line out. It was part of them being ready. Just moving. Yeah. If you come up to a line out and you plant your feet dead still, then your reaction time is going to be, and that's part of tennis too. I mean, obviously I've been a tennis coach for 30 years as well. So getting those fast footwork going as a tennis player, you never, even when you think you're about to be in the right spot to hit a ball, Jimmy Connors would move his feet, even if it was a couple of inches every time he hit the ball, even if he was in the perfect spot, just to get that balance, should we say. I mean, Ed, do you have any ideas on, what do you think about the boxing techniques for movement?
So I trained a ex-world champion boxer for several years, Jesse James Leha, and used a lot of his stuff, introduced him to the Spurs when I was with the Spurs, because I felt that balance, that quickness and everything else, the ability to move was really important. A few years ago, I trained a couple of ladies that were Olympic bronze medalists in fencing, watching the balance and the movements that they had. I've worked with badminton, but when you mentioned tennis, I got really kind of excited with that. Was I introduced a lot of my basketball players when I coached at University of Texas at San Antonio and at Baylor to playing tennis, because if you get somebody that can play tennis and you don't know how, you're always going to hit the ball back to them. But that person can run you from baseline to baseline, and you have to be balanced. You have to be in the right positions to do something. So I always use the tennis athletes to run my basketball players to death. And they would run them, sideline. So if they were out of position, they didn't get hit as hard with the ball. And then I take that over to now with, and it was a video that I put up with Paul Mullen doing the stuff off the shed with the med ball, any of the throwing with the med ball and all of that. I don't necessarily just do static, like your feet are planted and you're tossing it. I want to like slam the ball when you catch the ball, shuffle in, side pass into the wall, because that's you get a constant feedback from it. If you're not in a good position, if your body hasn't timed, if you haven't done all the things correctly, the ball comes off the wall kind of just real slow. It's the same thing. I use like wall ball, old handball games, with the little ball, not the European handball. I used to play a lot of, we called it wall ball, with a tennis ball and everything else in front of the big practice wall. And I'd get guys, you sit there and throw the ball off the wall, trying to react to it. For eye-hand coordination, having the players learn how to juggle. Little things like that. So yeah, I think boxing is wonderful, and I think it's a great way of achieving several different things, with off-feet conditioning, with some eye-hand coordination, and with balance. I mean, I told people all the time, after watching, Jesse James Leha was a great boxer before I ever trained him. He had already won 2 world titles, and he was a older boxer that they were putting guys in front of to see, how that person was. But he was still boxing. And when I came in and taught him different aspects of sprint work, agility, being balanced, and then the medicine ball, he went from being that ex-world champion to fighting for 2 world titles. At 30-something years old, we fought Costa Zoo in 2003 for a title down in Australia. and so being able to be around that class of boxing and watching those feet, because I was with him almost every day, when we trained, and just watching his feet, watching the balance. And I did get my fat self in there a couple of times in the ring, and, did get my head wrong a few times. But just to see, and then that's, like I said, I introduced him to the Spurs players. And to this day, I introduced him in 1999. And to this day, Pop still brings them out during training camp and has them work with players. And another one is and it's a friend of mine that played in the NFL as a center on the offensive line, swore that jumping rope was what kept him is quick on his feet, and being able to be balanced, and not like Coach was just saying, not just feet down, but actually moving your feet, little happy feet, you always call it, just never just staying feet planted on the ground, being able to bounce. And I use it in even with training, some of the big boys that I train, we yes, we do, some good max height jumps on a box, but I prefer to go out to the bleachers and the stairs and one step every time, trying to get your feet as quick as you can off the ground, get off the ground, get off the ground, get off the ground, being able to repeat that instead of one time, being able to repeat it 20 times.
Right. Justin, have you ever used trampette or a mini trampoline, like throwing rugby balls or tennis balls or agility balls, even ones with all the knobs, off the trampette to work on hand-eye coordination?
I have, not as often, just because the smaller trampolines seem to be getting tougher and tougher to come by these days. But definitely have used, like you said, the agility balls, or even you mentioned earlier, having the player have their back to you and then turn around and react. So a lot of times as a coach, I'll stand behind a player, throw the ball behind it, so it's coming from behind their head, and they have to, they're only standing, 4 to 6 feet away from the wall. So by the time their vision picks it up, and then they see it off the wall, they've got minimal time to react.
You don't even need that. If you put a guy 3 feet in front of you, facing away from you, and you just throw the rugby ball over his head so it comes this way, it's amazing how many times they'll drop it in front of them, even though they can see it coming down. That's a great way to work on their reaction too. And then put a pass in from that. People do a lot of these drills, but they don't connect them to what actually they're doing them for.
Yeah.
And that, I think that is one of the problems, is that they, okay, I can now catch that ball like this, really good. Well, what's next, right? Well, how about catching it and then making the pass? They forget the connection of, well, why am I doing this? I know Eamon was about to say.
How does that link to your game sense, is what you're talking? Yeah. Game sense is the ability to understand how each part interlinks with the other part. And that's not a rugby one, that's a sporting general one. How does it improve your game sense? Everything you do has to improve your game sense. So, sorry, Coach, we're just going to go onto this one. I appreciate that we have elite SSC coaches and lower level ones just starting off in their career. This is a mean average of scrum half play. It's a little bit more complicated or less complicated depending on what level you're working at, but this is a good starting point. This would give you some idea of how many passes a scrum half would make in a game, just from the base of a ruck or from a scrum or a line out. They would run a lot, 6 or 7K. That's about 5 miles in America. So you're talking acceleration and decelerations of quite a lot. The interesting one, we've got an asterisk next to it, 10 or 15 contact situations. The asterisk is in there depending on what you want the 9 to do. Now, we will come to that in a moment, Coach, but basically, just for our SSC friends, is the 9 part of the defensive line, or is he part of the secondary line? So in a very famous rugby player called Ruan Pienaar used to go in the line. So his contact situations were up in the 40s and 50s, but he was 6'2", so that helped. If you're a 5'5" scrum half, you really shouldn't be in the line trying to stop 20 stone forwards. So the contact situations, that just gives a rough overview of where we're going with this. So if you're an SSC coach now watching this, you're thinking, okay, I need to start thinking about this stuff a little bit more. Coach, we're going to talk about scrums and lineouts specifically. We'll start with the scrum. If you just stick to the technical stuff about being as a rugby coach, and then Justin and Ed can analyze it later. What do you want a scrum half to do at the scrum?
Is it your ball or their ball?
Oh, it's your ball. Good point. Well done.
Okay. Because otherwise I'd be getting my inner Austin Healy going. So obviously at the scrum, the first thing is you need to have communicated what you intend to do to the first receiver way before you actually get to the scrum. So he at least has an idea of what you're thinking. You're going to, as a scrum half, the chances of you changing it probably 90% anyway. Because one, you don't know where the ball is going to come out. You don't know how much pressure is going to be on the scrum. Nowadays, putting the ball, putting the ball in is so ridiculous. You can almost put it in the second row. So you don't really have to worry about the way you present the ball in the scrum like we used to. You give it a bit of right hand twist so the ball moved in and twisted off the ground. There's lots of weird and wonderful things you could do. But I think as far as your ball at the scrum, I think you have to have what we said originally was that vision.
Yeah.
You've got to have a really good idea of where you are on the field for your game sense, what's expected by you, what's expected by your first receiver, what your coach expects you to do, what the team expects you to do. And then, of course, you have all those put together and you do something completely different because you're a scrum.
So you have, sorry, go ahead.
All the physicality parts, I mean, it all comes together if you've got a good shove on with a scrum and their scrum half is attentive and you can see you're looking at their back row players. Are they bound tight? Are they paying attention? Are they looking at further out, which is a good indication where they might go? And then maybe you see that half gap and you're gone. And so a lot of those attributes you need, those fast twitch, that vision, they all come together right there.
It's interesting. It's interesting when you just said earlier about reading reaction, adjusting yourself. We're talking about reaction drills. We're now starting to see that reaction drills and the game sense. How do you link the reaction drills to the game? Well, it's all body language. It's all how do you see what's in front of you and how do you react to it? And these are things you can transfer from the gym onto a field. And you might not think there's a correlation, but there is right there. And it isn't you're trying to catch a ball off a wall. You're trying to see which foot is further forward. Can I go this way? Can I go that way? And training your body to make split-second decisions. On the line-out, coach, so the only thing I insist on in the line-out from a scrum half is that they don't move from the same starting point. They have to be the same place every single time. Now, that's for offense and defense reasons. But so if I tell my scrum half to be in this particular spot every single time, and then after the ball is thrown in, they can do the rest. Now, we won't go into that. That's a coaching thing, but for a line-out coach thing. But everything else, coach, what do you want once the ball is in the line-out? What are we looking for the scrum half to do once the ball is in our possession?
In our possession?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so a lot of those things are exactly the same for the scrum. He's got to be looking to see what the opposition are looking to do before too many scrum halves at the lower level pay no attention to what's going on around them. You know, ball comes into their hands and I'm a distributor only. That's what their coach tells them, or that's what they think they are. I mean, they've got to realize they are a tactical decision maker. They're not just a distributor. And so they have to look at the opposition. They have to say, okay, where's the threat coming from the opposition onto me? Can I make that initial decision of where the ball's going, or do I have to adapt and change? And we've got to give them the tools to be able to adapt very, very quickly. Very quickly. Yeah. Because those half gaps or those decisions, they're made in a microsecond almost. And that's what makes the difference between a top level scrum half and somebody who just flings the ball out. And if you're a flinger, as I call them, then the opposition are just going to be all, because they know what's coming on. They know exactly what you're doing. So I don't think we make enough effort or pay attention enough to teaching our scrum halves to read the opposition lineout.
Yeah.
Are they lifting? Are they going to compete with our lineout? You need to know that. Are they just going to put up a soft defense and then attack our back line? In which case, maybe I don't want to just be passing the ball out. Maybe I need to do something else. There was actually a game this weekend. Can't remember who Leicester played. I think they played. I wasn't watching the Leicester game. It was a referral to the game against London Irish.
Oh yeah.
The London Irish were playing. One of the commentators said, "Oh, they've figured out that London's Irish defense at the line out. They don't pay attention to the 9-10 channel. They move way out, and people figured that out, and they just run right through it." So you really need to watch that. Obviously, back in the day, the scrum half used to call the line out calls. So it was also part of that. Nowadays, he may or may not do that. There may be other triggers, but it's actually quite easy for the scrum half to do that if he's coherent with what's going on. Even as simple as when you stand in the line out, right foot pointed to the touch line is at the front, feet together, middle, left foot pointing the other way, back, right? Pretty easy. And it's amazing how many people nowadays never look at the other scrum half to see what he's doing. Okay, all the calls going on, pizza, number 570, and all he's doing is he's got his feet. So I think that for me that all the passing stuff and from the scrum and the line out is all predicated on how much vision and how much time you've spent teaching your scrum half the
reading of cues.
Yeah, the cues, the visual cues it's a visual cue game.
Yeah.
Scrum half. What am I?
So
all the technical stuff is easy. That's it's easy.
Yeah.
The other bit is hard.
It's the thing that, that's absolutely spot on. It gives you, it's where this should trigger the S&C coach now, when we just go back to Justin and Ed, is what is the number one factor that affects thinking on a rugby field? And it's fatigue. So if you have an unfit 9 or an unfit scrum half, and they can't get on the field and they can't make effective passes and they can't get off the mark quickly, repeated sets throughout a game, they can't do any of the things that Coach Barford and myself want. So handing it back to you guys, what are your thoughts on developing a scrum half based on what you've heard so far?
No, we've got a few examples of that coming up a little bit later, but did just want to post up this photo that I found and kind of get Ed's thoughts on it. This is obviously I'm sure we'll reserve Coach Barford's comments on or critiques on
He's
this.
He's going to leap out the screen.
But Ed, from a strength conditioning perspective, right? When you look at this image, especially the one on the right hand side, as a strength coach, I mean, what immediately comes to mind in terms of what needs to be addressed with this example?
Mobility, body position. Why is he leaned over with his head down and a hump in his back? Is he not flexible enough to spread his legs out a little bit more and squat down to the ball? Yeah. That's just a bend at the back and never a bend at the hips. There's going to be no power or no anything on that ball. And with your head down like that, your butt up in the air, you're surely going to get tipped over quickly. All I got to do is brush against you and you're going to fall on your butt. That's
Yeah, so it's kind of that bracing in contact kind of.
well, that's gonna be
And
some
again,
with his rear end in the ground.
yeah, yeah, and certainly for the audience, we're not advocating this is the desired desired technique for the scrum half, but as a former scrum half and myself and of course as a strength coach as well, this is definitely something that now we mentioned earlier the distance and the metrics. These days I think the scrum half is one of the more often substituted positions. At most levels, the scrum half might be looking at 60, 70 minutes. Rarely I think are they covering a full 80. Maybe at the younger developmental levels, high school, club rugby, etc., you might get a scrum half that plays the entire game, and this might be more of what you see towards the later half of the match, which again kind of goes back to Coach Costner's comments about mobility and just mobility, flexibility, and actual strength in that position. I put a couple of examples in here, and I'm sure Coach Costner has plenty of others. Just some things that can kind of help those athletes open up, get comfortable, get more hip mobility, to be able to sit comfortably in that position. I know the one thing I couldn't find, Ed, is I know you've got a great ankle mobility exercise that you use for your front rowers all the time. Would have loved to have highlighted that one here as well. But just in terms of mobility, flexibility, what are some other things that you've used that would benefit players in these positions?
So this is I train Evan Conlon that playing at Lindenwood. It's a really pretty good little scrum half, and there's things that I address with him, and I've addressed it with other coaches too. Is a lot of coaches get really hell bent on like depth in a squat. Well, this is one of the reasons for the depth in the squat: ankle mobility, knee mobility, hip mobility, thoracic spine mobility. All of that's addressed with a back squat. All of that's addressed with an overhead squat. But to take it further, I'll use a lot of like the lateral, we call it the Cossack squat, lateral squats. In that, I put a bar on their back, plate forward. At first, plate overhead, forward lunge with the plate overhead, elevated front foot lunge. A lot of the high box step ups. So when I was in track at Baylor and at UT San Antonio, I would use high box step ups quite a bit, so that front foot that knee was real far, was nice and forward. A lot of stress on the ankle and the Achilles, and then driving up, through the posterior chain. I use the lateral squatting, and that we'll use with a barbell on the back so that they have to stay upright, and everything else. A lot of so once you get the static and a little bit of mobility right there, you also want to have some dynamic work on that ability to I guess would be absorb that force through the foot. So I still do old school, old style split snatches, where I'm actually having their split their feet nice and wide so that they have to be able to absorb that force there, so that those tendons and ligaments can do that. A lot of like I said, and a lot of throwing, trying to get down to that ball. But it starts with that whole body coordination and that whole body mobility. Instead of looking at it just in pieces, looking at it the whole body, in there. If you're tight in your thoracic spine, you're not gonna be able to. That's a great one right there on the right, Justin, because you got a little bit more, you got a little bit more dynamic to it. So they're actually having to decelerate. You're having to, decelerate that little bit of speed there. So what else? All right.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. All right. So,
Justin,
Coach-
there's a stretching technique that they do in Aikido, where they call it the three-way stretch, where they go down basically with one leg out. It's almost the identical position of a scrum half pass, in fact. They go down on one hip with their, we'll say their right leg underneath them and their left leg out. And then they swivel on their hips to put their left leg under them and their right foot out. They're kind of swiveling backwards and forwards, low position. I don't know if you've seen that. I could do it for you, but I'd probably pull a hamstring. But it's a very good stretching technique for the scrum half. So you might want to take a peek at that. And the other thing was, I tried to find it. There was a guy in New Zealand a few years ago. I can't remember if he did his master's or his PhD on the mechanics of the scrum half pass. And you could probably find it online somewhere.
Right. Okay. So what we're going to do now, Coach, we're going to look at two more things. First up, we're going to look at open play, which is in rugby terms, we call that phase play, where you move around the field and there's a tackle made and the ball comes out of the back of the tackle, and the scrum half would move up to the ball and move the ball onto the next part of the field. I appreciate I sound like someone who's never played before, but I'm trying to keep it non-technical for our SSC friends. So we're talking about linking it with what Justin and Ed were talking about. We're talking about getting down low, moving the ball away. What other things are we looking for here with regards to what they do? You mentioned earlier about accelerations. You mentioned something about cues. How does that all link in with open play as opposed to set piece play?
Well, of course, it all depends where you are on the field. But before we even get into that, I'd like to just get rid of a misnomer, right?
Okay.
And that is that the scrum half, and you even brought it up yourself, is that the scrum half moves around the field from ruck to ruck, distributing the ball. And I'm actually a believer is that the first person closest to the ball, theoretically, if we're trying to do fast ball, should be the person who passes the ball. So in some respects, many players should have the same attributes as a scrum half.
So just to stop you for a second.
Yeah, so that opens up the whole can of worms.
So
right
one thing I should tell Justin and Ed, I've done some other work with Coach Smith, and we talked about his World Cup win a few years ago. And he said, referring to exactly what Coach Barford has just said, he said that not only did he have the best scrum halves in the world, he said that every member of his front row were taught to be scrum halves for exactly the reason Coach just said. If you want to play a fast game, you can't be relying on just one player. So a lot of the things you're going to do in the gym with regards to a 9 would also apply to a front row player, because they would have to pass the ball if the 9 isn't there. Sorry, Coach, you were going to say. So misnomer was the first. You said you were going to change the misnomer. Then we talked about what would happen if the 9 has the ball in their hand, what options are open to them, what do they look for, what do they see, who do they talk to, and so on.
Yeah, the communication part, I find quite interesting in that you look at some NFL games and they practice knowing that they're going to go to, say, Buffalo, where the sound is so deafening you can't hear what the other person's saying, right?
Yeah.
At the line. So they have to have some visual cue of, well, what are we going to do? Rugby is a communicating game, and we spend so little time on it. And the number of scrum halves that I've had in national teams that are quiet as a mouse, right? You can't even hear them. And I'll give you a really good example of this, and Ed might be able to pick up on this. We played rugby in Australia, the U18s against Australia, and got absolutely hammered. Australia was, I mean, they were so loud, they're talking to each other, balls going all over the place, clubbing. Played basketball against them a day later in the gym, completely the opposite.
Wow.
The Americans were yelling at each other, ball, 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 and Australia was dead quiet. Why is that? Right? And it's familiarity, it's what you're comfortable with. And it's nothing to do with the voice, because I was at a RFU course on with a speech therapist, and she told myself and the other American coach we didn't need to be there because Americans are naturally loud, which was kind of funny, I thought at the time.
No, really?
Yeah,
No.
yes, really. So I think the communication part is, yeah, we talk a lot about, you know, communication, but we never really address it. How do we communicate with the other players? What are the cues we're looking at? What are they looking at? That is as important as the scrum half going, okay, I'm going to be passing the ball to you. You should know that. But as the first receiver or the receiver, are you seeing the same thing as me? You know.
Yeah. Do they have noticing skills?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, well, yeah.
What do you actually notice? What are you actually seeing? Noticing skills.
Yeah. How many times do you see, you know, younger players getting hit on the side of the head with the ball because they're not looking? You know, the no-look pass in basketball. You know, it's become accepted. When Pete Maravich first started doing it, no one knew what the hell he was doing. The ball got just thrown out of bounds. So that whole communication part of, to me, is open play. All the other stuff, you know, being able to run, the kicking part, all that stuff. But I think that the synchronicity with the other players as a scrum half in attack, in open play, is paramount. And that really comes as much from being around with the other players, being coherent with them, and then just, you know, playing a week in, week out. And you start to know, you know, when he moves to the right, he's going to flick it over my head, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think
it starts in the gymnasium. It starts in the gym with the, you know, they all get to know each other. They talk to each other. A few weeks ago, on the passing of a former player of ours, coach, I put a video up of our players dancing in a gymnasium.
Oh yes,
we were actually in the next room, never even knew that was happening.
Yeah.
We were literally next door, and we had no idea that film was being made, and opened the door, and that was it. That we didn't know anything was happening, because we didn't notice that all the players had suddenly disappeared. So it happens to coaches too. Coaches can get, we can get narrow focused. You know, players, we have to open it up a little bit as coach. Sorry, coach, go on.
This is an interesting question for Ed and Justin. In the gym, when you're lifting or doing an exercise, is there a different mindset if it's loud and there's music playing to if it's completely quiet?
Oh, I think there's definitely a different mindset. I mean, you can't have, it's not a library. I don't expect them to be quiet. I don't let the music get too far above where I can coach, but I want them to have, you know, I want them to be able to be comfortable in there, and I want communication. And I tried to do that here when I was with the Gold, but it just didn't happen. I'm a big believer in like the front row training together, the back five training together, training with each other. When I went to a little strength coaches conference we have called Summer Strong from Sornex Equipment, we were at the University of South Carolina, and in their weight room, they had the platform set up and they were one across from each other all the way down. And down here on the end, that was the offensive lineman on one platform and the defensive lineman on the platform across from them. You know, and it went all the way up the way, so that it was always a challenge. You can go back, there's a company called Iron Mind that does a lot of weightlifting videos in that, where weightlifting, Olympic style weightlifting, is very quiet. A lot of technical things happen. Everything is very quiet, and there's not like a powerlifting meet where you're chewing on the bar, banging your head, which is why I did powerlifting. But there's videos in there with some of the at the Olympics while they're there for several weeks prior to getting all their workouts in, getting acclimated, and you would have on the platform here, you would have one of the greatest lifters from Greece when they were a hot shot team for a while. And he was lifting here, and the guy that he was going to be competing against was no more than 8 feet from him on a platform across from him. And down a couple more platforms was the next, and it was a constant, it was nonverbal, but it was a constant challenge of each other. And you want to, I mean, it's the same as you on the field. You want that communication, you want that verbal and nonverbal communication to happen, and it can be facilitated anywhere. It has to be done in the weight room with everybody kind of coming together, cheering each other on, getting after it, and making sure that everybody's level of play and everybody's level of training is up. Because nobody's going to come in there. I'm not going to be a cheerleader, but I'm going to get you going. But if you're not having a great day, a couple of your teammates around you can kind of lift you up into that. And we all have a great training session. Mentioning, basketball with that verbal communication, that starts young for them. Being around a lot of high school basketball players and everything else. You mentioned Pistol Pete Maravich, one of the kids that I trained, his dad actually played with Pistol Pete here in New Orleans when it was the New Orleans Jazz. So hearing stories about all that, and then being with the Spurs with Manu Ginobili, who's the king of no look, ball going friggin' everywhere. And guys, they know where to be. There's a play that always comes up on Memorial Day here in the US. It was called the Memorial Day Miracle. When the ball came in, Mario Elie rotated the ball, threw it down to Sean Elliott, who was dancing. If his heels would have come down, he would have been out of bounds, and drained this long 3-point shot from the corner that put us over Portland and moved us to the next round. So, Mario Elie knew that Sean Elliott was going to be there. He knew where he was going to be 100 times. That's just the way they come down the floor. They know where that ball player is going to go. They know where he's going to be. They know where he's going to go. And it's verbal and nonverbal. But yeah, they do call for the ball. Geez, they got all kinds of noises. It sounds like some of the South Africans with that click when they speak click, yeah. And everything else. They got all kinds of noises that they yell out. And the athletic trainer, the physio, who does a lot of stuff on the bench since he sits next to the coach, ours at 5 seconds left to go on the shot clock had to yell butter. Why they ever came up with the word butter didn't matter, but that's what you would hear poor Will Sevening start yelling butter at 5 seconds, and it told the players it was something different, and it told the players, boom, you got 5 seconds left on the shot clock. Either rotate the ball or shoot the ball.
Right.
Yeah.
If you, a good thing to watch for lots of coaches would be to watch the way Fiji practice. They just fling it out. They've got no calls. Half the time, nobody knows what the hell they're doing, including themselves. But they practice together so much that they do have that second sense. And you can't practice a tactical decision-making position in a vacuum. You have to be constantly put under pressure, and you constantly have to have all this outside stimulus going on for you to be able to figure your way through. It's like going through a maze, all right?
Yeah.
I've got this going on, I've got this going on. Which way do I get through? And from a strength and conditioning point of view, when you think about it, a lot of it is done in a vacuum, right? I mean, you're doing all these exercises here in the gym to promote being able to play on the field, but are there ways more where they could be more interactive in the gym to prepare you for being on the field? I don't know. I'm not really a strength and conditioning guy. I yell at strength and conditioning guys all the time.
One of the you might enjoy this, coach, because when Coach Barford and I worked together, we had his instructions. He basically gave me one instruction: I want to win every line-out ball. That was it. That's it. That's the only thing he said to me the entire time I was there. I want to win everything. I went, okay. But we did things like scenarios where I would send off the thrower, and I said, right, your thrower's been sent off the field. Now what do you do? And they would have to come up with the answer themselves. So I think I mentioned this to you, Justin, previously. One of the things that's happening here now is that they're doing rotation games on fields. So three teams two would play, one on the sideline. While the one on the sideline are waiting, they would have to either make a jigsaw, put a jigsaw together. So they'd have to work as a team to make the jigsaw the first time round. So they couldn't go back on the field unless they finished a jigsaw as a team. So that to work it out, it's not a 100-piece jigsaw. It's like a 5-year-old jigsaw. It's not that hard. But it was to change their mind and change what they were doing. And then the second rotation, they would have to identify the attributes of every single player on the other team. Of the team they were going to play next, they'd have to have a conversation about what each of them were good at, what each of them were bad at. What that did was that they became better teammates. They were on the field and said, you always step off your left or you always step off your right. Now, the knock-on effect in the gym would be we do a set of exercises, and then you say, right, I want you to run over there and do lights on the wall. Or I want you to run over there and do the, as Justin's got on the screen there, alternating hand-eye drill. You just raise the atmosphere, and then each person who then alternates, your buddy up system or the front rows guys train together, they'd know that this guy's really good at alternating hand drill, but my friend here isn't. So let's help him get better at that. He can get better at bench, this guy. And it's just a way of generating that ethos where you're all in it together. You start to notice what each other's doing. And when you start noticing things, you start realizing the good things about them. And also when things aren't going so great. Because then you suddenly...
Eamon, can I...
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Jump in there quickly. One other thing that I've used very successfully, and Eamon can agree to this, I'm sure, is that I took basically our gym out onto the field.
Yeah.
And even though we did a lot of, to say, indoor gym stuff, lifting, we did it with logs, we had weights and stuff too. But we would lift for, say, 10 minutes, and then we would play rugby for 10 minutes. Yeah. Then we would go back and we'd lift again, and I'd have a word with Paul Holmes and say, okay, did you see that they couldn't do that as fast as I wanted? Let's work on the next rotation of speeding them up by using something we have over here, lifting the logs quicker or something, and then we'll play rugby again for 10 minutes. So it was an evolving thing, not only for the strength and conditioning coach, but for the players. So nothing was ever really done in a vacuum. And that's not always possible, but certainly during the season, it worked really, really well. Yeah. We never just did a strength and conditioning session. It was always paired with playing rugby.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Ed?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of different exercises and stuff that you can take out to rugby pitch, basketball court, or anywhere else to do that. It's a great thing for preseason work. When I was with the Spurs, that was what we would do. We'd get maybe maybe 2 days where I could get them in the weight room for 20, 30 minutes to get some strength work in and maintain that strength levels and all of that. But we did a lot of stuff that were circuits out on the basketball floor. You say that, that way. I mean, I used to do a lot of my conditioning work on the court, and I had a whole packet of different, running drills that we would do on the court. And at the end of every running drill, they had to make 2 free throws while they were breathing hard and fatigued. Yeah. Stole that from Mark Graybo, who was with the Golden State Warriors for a long time. My basketball kids, they'd be, getting done doing their conditioning. They walk up to the foul line, hand them the ball, and I had to learn the timing of the referee, an NBA referee or a college referee, but had to do that, and then boom, here's your time. You know, you have X amount of seconds to shoot those free throws, you know, each one. So boom, here's the ball, let's go. Settle your breathing down, everything else. The same thing that I learned when I was in the Army, you know, going through Ranger School as well. You know, you're running, somebody's trying to shoot you, you're running. You know, you're running, you're diving, you're sprinting, you're getting somewhere. Now you got to settle down, you got to, you know, take a half a breath. That's about all you're going to get is a half a breath before you have to start returning fire. You have something to do. So yeah, it's a great way of doing it, and works really well for preseason, works well for in season, at least once a week that way. English Rugby has a series that they were doing. It was Raising Sons or something like that, right before World Cup. And one of the strength coaches, Tom, is a buddy of mine, and asked him questions and that, and seeing a lot of the stuff that they did, and a lot of great little circuits. Now, it doesn't take a lot of weight. You know, 60 kilos on a barbell. You got one guy in the front, you know, one guy in the back, picking it up, carrying it like you're going to carry like you're helping somebody move. Go 30 meters, turn around, come back 30 meters, put it over your head. You know, you use the logs or anything like that for timing, you know, over the head, because everybody has to work together as a team.
Yeah, we did a lot of that. Eamon, getting back to your 3 teams thing they're doing in England.
Yeah.
That was actually done 20 years ago in France. They figured out that rugby was played in periods of a minute and a half. So they split their teams up into 3 teams. A would play B for a minute and a half while C was doing something, an activity or whatever it was. Then C would come on and play A. So they played 3 minutes with a minute and a half off, and they played like that. I tried that at Life. France actually got to an hour of playing like that. Everybody was so tired. Life got to 40 minutes. And if you remember rightly, we played an entire game with weights and playing rugby to simulate, because we didn't have a game that weekend. Do you remember that?
I've got it on video. I videoed the whole thing. I've still got it. We basically created 2 halves of rugby, 40 minutes, and we went from the exercise on the side of the field to line outs on the field to exercises off the field to scrum, multiple phase play, semi-opposed tackling, and it ran for 40 minutes. I think it was 96% humidity and 93 degrees when we did it. I've never seen men work so hard in my life. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I remember one player was actually selected for an English Premiership club when he went home. When he played for us, he went home, and he was the fittest guy on the Premiership team. He was supposed to be a backup. He ended up being the starter the minute he arrived home. They couldn't believe how good he was, and they went, really, and they had to, and you know, he's now a coach. That player's now a coach of a Premiership team. But it was revolutionary. I've never seen anything quite like it. I know coach had talked to me about it beforehand, but the physicality of it, I've got it on video. It's incredible watch. It's an absolute incredible watch. But it takes a lot of trust in the coach to go, we're doing this not because I'm going to make you sweat. I'm doing it because I think it'll make you winners. And it worked. It was fantastic from start to finish. I got sunstroke. I got rushed home. So
we did give them 10-minute halftime. So I remember that.
Oh, that was it, because we had to go in the changing room and give a halftime talk.
That's right.
We ran in the changing room and we had to do a halftime talk. So we ran off the field into the changing room. I had the forwards. Coach Holmes had the backs. 5 minutes later, Coach Barford came in, did a team talk, and we went back outside and did it again. It was incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah.
A great way of developing work capacity, that's for sure.
Yeah, it just goes to prove, you put good people in good places, and they'll have good outcomes. It's all about selecting the right personnel. You get the right people to do it with the coaches, and you get the right players, and they all believe in each other, and they all trust. The trust has to be built over a period of time, of course.
Right.
Trust doesn't come from being paid. there's plenty of players in the MLR that are being paid that absolutely do not trust their coaching staff. But after a while, the coaches that'll be successful will be the ones that the players will go, look, this is ridiculous, but I trust the guy. I trust him. I trust him with my welfare. I trust him with my livelihood. Yeah, let's go and do it. And the better teams will be based on trust as opposed to this autocratic system of, I'm the head coach, you are doing it, and we're going to do it this way and that way. And, the better MLR teams will come out the other side, with good organizations, good players.
So Justin, I'm looking at this stuff here and thinking, for Scrumhalves stuff, a lot of this, you don't necessarily have another person with you, but if you did, you could be giving them, visual cues and stuff to make it harder, like the one where you were throwing the agility ball at the wall. You could have a person behind going, okay, put your left leg up, put your right leg up, hold your right hand up. What color cone do I have in front of me? Can you sing me a song? I'd like you to, give me directions all the way home. Lots of different things to make you're doing one activity, but you're doing another activity on top of that. And you just keep piling, I want you to lift your leg up, your right leg up, sing me a song, catch the ball, tell me what color's in front of you. And you just keep adding more and more stimulus to them while they're doing that activity.
And it becomes normalized. Them looking for other things becomes a normal state of affairs. So when they're doing it the way they were trained to do it, they go, their minds wander off and do something else, and they start looking around them, and their technique goes. But if you give them something to notice, their technique will stay solid, and away you go. That's just the things we learned as coaches over 30 years on.
I'm constantly looking in my mirror when I leave the pub for flashing lights and things like that. So it works very well. Having another
I remember, but one of the great things I learned over lockdown was a wonderful skills coach from France said a toy shop is a skills coach best friend. Toy stores are because anything that clicks, whistles, buzzes, whirs, or is made of colors and shiny things are a skills coach best friend, because they make the players look and make them think and make them understand. And and it's that's the most important lesson I learned. So Scott, sorry, Justin, go ahead. I want to finish on this. Kicking quality, right? So I should premise this by saying, in Ohio, we didn't do an awful lot of kicking in play. We did an awful lot of kicking practice down to Coach Holmes, to be fair, of kicking for posts. But again, going back to our theme of meaning something, he used to take all the players that were kickers and take them all out together, and there was something on every kick, be it a buck, $5, a tank of gas. It was always competitive all of the time, and there was no easy sessions for kicking. If you went out there and you had a horror show, it was going to cost you something. It didn't go back. Don't get me wrong. They were like, there could have been 10 cents on it, and it would have been massively competitive. And consequently, in the final game that we played, our starting kicker slotted a kick from the sideline. He came off. Our replacement kicker came on, and he did exactly the same. Slotted it from the sideline. The hardest kick in rugby. And they both slotted it. Fantastic. Two different players, two different parts of the field, nailed it. And it's because of the consequence training, the consequence stuff, making them do other things. So kicking quality, modern rugby relies on three types of kicks that you see a lot of. A territorial kick, which is kicked off the field. A distance kick, which is to do with pushing the opposition back. And the third kick is the kick you try and get back. So it's a tactical chase kick. So three types of kick. The first two where you are facing towards where you're kicking it. The other one is a kick where your body has to rotate. The box kick has to rotate. With regards to kicking quality, coach, and how I appreciate you're not a fan of kicking, having worked with you for a long time, looking at kicking as something that they should focus on. We talked about cues. What are the cues you would look for when you kick? what would be a box kick cue, what would be a kick and chase cue, and then obviously while Coach Barford is talking, Ed and Justin can talk about maybe the S&C requirements to be a good kicker. What can you do to help a kicker? So, sorry, Coach, go ahead.
Well, the first thing obviously is you've
Go
got
do
to look, one, where you are on the field. Two, is there a space to kick to?
Yeah.
So first of all, is there an open space where I can put the ball to gain territory? Number two, is there somebody on the field who is a complete twit as far as catching the ball is concerned? Can I put him under pressure?
Yeah.
Whether there's anybody following the kick up or not, do I have any ideas that this guy is not good with the, should we say, the high ball?
Yeah.
Or is there a player who can be easily maneuvered out of position so I can put a kick in?
Yeah.
The younger you are, the kicking in the United States is, I would say, horrific. I can't put it any better than that. It's just from national team players where I've seen our national team scrum half kick 4 box kicks into touch to players who just kick because it's the only thing that's left in them. It's like, oh, I think this is where I kick.
Right.
Is that right, coach? Did I kick it in the right spot? They have no idea why they're kicking. It's just, they have no control of the ball and how to kick.
Yeah.
But that again is part of our job, is giving them the vision and the game sense and the tactical awareness. You know,
Sure.
do I kick for position? Do I kick for territory? Do I kick the high ball? Do I kick to try and, as Eamon said, retain the ball back? And if your answer to those is, well, I'm not sure, or I don't think I can get the ball back, then why give them the ball in the first place? That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
if I can interject, how would you guys see the S&C kind of impacting those decisions?
Well, I
Fatigue.
can give you some examples as far as how to make it, let's say a drill for you guys to do, or something like that, to make it a box kick, for instance. Get an old hockey goal and have your player actually put the ball inside the hockey goal. He's got to pull it out of the hockey goal and kick it over the bar. Okay, and you got somebody screaming at him. It's a way I've taught people how to box kick, because they've got to lift the ball up so fast. I think as far as the kick is concerned, obviously that's a fast twitch thing. They've got to be able to extend their leg high enough to kick the ball. A lot of times they kick from too low in their body rather than lifting the ball up with their foot. A good example of that is if you look at an NFL punter, how high they actually keep their foot in contact with the ball when they kick. A lot of rugby players tend to do a very fast kick to drive the ball, and so their foot leaves the ball quite quickly. Distance and control is based on how long your foot is in contact with the ball. So I think that's something certainly you could look at.
So maybe the option would be, have you looked at the machines in your gymnasiums that you would have access to that would could replicate the kicking motion?
Yeah.
So
also strength. I mean, you gotta have strong legs to be able to kick.
Yeah. But it could be things like, can you put a TheraBand on the machine, say on the right there? Justin's got. Is that what's that called? What's that machine called?
Power rack.
Power rack,
Yeah,
right? So you attach an elastic on the bottom of the power rack, and the guy can go through a resistance exercise of getting his leg. We use it as warm up. Players use it as a warm up. They attach it to a post and sort of get their legs flexed and get their legs moving. But is there something in the gymnasium that isn't currently tasked for a kicker? Well, obviously there is, but I'm trying to think. I'm not the expert, which is why I've got Justin in my life. So is there something you can use in a gymnasium that isn't designed for kicking that could be repurposed for kicking. And that's the thing. There used to be, when you do lower leg raises, when you sit in the chair and you do lower leg raises, could you repurpose that for kicking using one leg instead of two? Stuff like that.
Can I throw something in there just
You can.
to join the question?
Yeah.
For instance, and I know Ed and you, Justin, certainly do this. If you take a medicine ball and you throw that around for a while, and then you go to a basketball, the basketball feels like it weighs nothing at all, right? So I wondered if it's like, I'm not suggesting you go and buy yourself a pair of like Frankenstein shoes and wear them around, put a pair of rugby shoes on afterwards. But is there something similar in that kind of concept that you could do in the gym?
You could use ankle weights, rubber tubing, and everything else, but you can't. If you use too heavy of a weight, you're going to decelerate the leg. You're going to slow the leg down. You're not going to work the fast twitch fibers. You're not going to work that. I used to do, because I trained a couple of punters when I worked in American football. One that punted in the NFL for a while. I learned a lot from Kent. We used to do some knee drive work with like a real light med ball, drop it on his knee, make him drive his knee up. Did a lot of deceleration work so that when he did get his leg up, because he got his leg up, but being able to keep that hamstring healthy. So we would put tubing on the top of the power rack and had ankle cuffs, and we would do speed work with the leg coming down, straight down. Cal Dietz has, Justin, you know that Cal Dietz has the ones that he has where he stretches the band, the big band across the rack. On the bottom, they lay down on the ground and slam, straight-legged, and slam that heel into that band. So you're getting at a deceleration mechanics on the backside, and you're able to do that. It's just like running uphill. If you run uphill and you're doing it for speed development, it's a 2 to 3% grade. If you're running uphill for a strength development, it's a 30 to 40% grade.
All right.
When you run uphill, and if you keep running up that hill or you keep running in that sand, you're going to change mechanics and you're going to become slow unless you're doing something that over speed work. So it's the same thing, it's we used to use a lot of, like I said, we would lift with my basketball guys, we would lift and we would always go out and shoot to get that feel for the ball back. So yeah, a light ankle weight would be all right. Trying to go anything heavier than that, and you're going to start recruiting different muscles, and you take a chance of getting hurt. And man, kickers, especially with the NFL, I mean, that's you're just specialty right there.
Yeah.
And they only come on for that. Man, they're not going to do any of that.
So would you say, Ed, like lightweight, fast reps, a few of them?
Yeah, you do that. I'd rather see it but done with speed cord and TheraBand than I would with any kind of weight, because you're not going to change the mechanics. There's a kid that was a rugby player. They called him a Scottish Hammer, and he made the squad with the Cleveland Browns. He's a punter for the Cleveland Browns. He beat out Colquitt, who was a great punter. His dad was a punter. His brothers are punting. He hooked on later, but this kid was a rugby player in Scotland. His dad is a RAF, got stationed out in Baltimore, Boston, and he started playing American football. I met him when I was up there in training camp when Ben Franks met me up there with the Cleveland Browns, and we met him and talked to him for a while. Leg strength is another thing. Leg strength and core strength. Those are going to be your main ones right there. But always making sure that, I mean, they squat heavy. Kent that punted in the NFL for several years. We squatted heavy, but we always went out and did speed work as well. And by speed work, I mean like with the tubing, we'd hook the speed cord that you would run against. I would hook it up over the power rack, and we would sit on a bench and having to bring that straight leg down hard. Same thing now. It's just easier to do it against a band in the power rack. You can do it with the thicker bands that you do the stretches with. just
Yeah.
get around the ankle and stand back while that guy's, decelerating, bringing that hamstring down. And that, because that's where that's where you get the injuries, and that's where you lose a lot of it, is the deceleration. Everybody can accelerate. It's stopping. It's no different. It's them stopping that arm. You look at baseball pitchers, they spend a lot of time on the posterior chain, on that posterior chain, on those muscles that decelerate the ball. There's a great baseball player for the Chicago Cubs, Kerry Woods, and he ended up pitching himself out. And Tom House, who's one of the gurus of baseball pitching and for football, came out and said that his bicep wasn't strong enough to decelerate his hand. So when he would release the ball, his elbow hyperextended all the time, and therefore he ended up destroying his elbow because his bicep wasn't strong enough to hold on to that velocity of the hand.
Right.
So then you're just looking at injury prevention. You're not going to really, guys like that, they're going to go out and kick, hundreds of times. That's where they're going to get better at. You're just trying to keep them healthy.
I think something that Eamon didn't put up about kicking, which is important for the scrum half, is accuracy.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily really have to a big kick, a long kick, a tactical, but when you do kick, it needs to be accurate.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff you can do on the field. You can set up targets for you to, just playing a game of rugby golf improves your accuracy.
Yeah.
But I think that's an important part, being able to put the ball exactly where you want it.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's something that can certainly be worked on their own, or with with targets or another.
Yeah.
Sure.
A bunch of trash cans out there and get the ball in the trash can.
That's it.
That's
That's
how you
it.
do it.
I think the other thing too is, as Ed, I mean, one of the guys that you and I follow very closely, Duncan French, all the work that he's done more recently with the UFC. And so if you liken, especially a box kick, if you liken that to, one of the martial arts kicks, I think he was doing a presentation one time and kind of discussed a very similar question, or was given a very similar question about strengthening, fighters' legs for kicks. And he said, well, I guess to kind of put a little bit of a nerd twist on what Ed was saying about slowing it down, he said those martial arts kicks, I mean, they can execute those in a fraction of a second. I can't remember, and don't quote me on it, maybe like 0.2 to 0.3, seconds. And anything that slows down that motion or that movement, more than, as Ed said, more than 10 to 20%, then you're just kind of, you're breaking technique, and you're actually in some ways hurting the athlete for when they actually need to execute it the right way. So hearing a guy like Duncan refer to it in regards to fighting and kickboxing and whatnot really kind of put it into perspective. I mean, we talked about, Aikido and tennis, and now you're talking about kicking and how that might relate to mixed martial arts. I mean, those are guys that are kicking. How many box kicks is a scrum half going to make in a week? How many kicks a week is a fighter going to make in a week, and his leg health and leg strength and that sort of thing. So I think that's another avenue that those athletes can kind of pull from.
One other ability that we didn't discuss is the fact that as you move up the ladder, the ability to be able to kick with both feet. There's a lot of scrum halves out there who are just one-footed, and that enables other teams to block you or know how you're going to kick or when, because of the fact that you can only kick to one side. So I think that the ability to be able to kick with both feet and working on that ability on your own or with your coach is, I think that's definitely part of the scrum half's arsenal, should we say?
Yeah, and I mean, of course, Ed can attest to this, that just our feet are just like our hands. I mean, we're going to be dominant from one side to the other, and so many athletes, if you are a right-footed kicker, your right leg is I would argue naturally more flexible than your left leg, and a lot of times athletes just kind of write it off. They just say, well, it is what it is kind of thing. And by giving that equal attention, getting your non-dominant side just as flexible as your dominant side, kind of allows them to develop that bilateral skill, or that balance, from left to right that much better.
I'm going to give you a little insight of this, but not everybody can do this. But when I was younger, my rugby coach told me to go learn the triple jump because I was way too dominant on one leg. And with the triple jump, you got to be able to do it on both. And so he says, okay, when you can do the triple jump and you can reach, I think it was like 48 feet or something ridiculous, come back. So I went for a whole summer and just did triple jump. Didn't help my kicking, but my legs were better, I guess.
Well, and just to, kind of goes back to the point that, Ed was talking about earlier is not just the deceleration and the brakes, but a lot of this in general, anytime I talk to young coaches or even young athletes, they say, well, I need a stronger core. And actually this always reminds me of a mentor of mine, a good friend of Ed's, Pete Harding, who kind of shared this with me. He said, what is the core? He when an athlete brings this up, that he always loves showing a picture and say, define for me what the core is, and you always end up with, they say, well, from the bottom of the ribs to the top of the hips, and the next guy might say, okay, well, it's from the chest to the mid thigh, and then the next guy comes along and says, well, it's from your armpits to your knees. They can never explain it. And they say core training. And then when they start defining it, it's like, oh, well, you're just doing abs, that's all it is. And the thing that a lot of athletes forget about, and again, this kind of plays into Ed's comment about deceleration, is, if that truly is your definition of core, and I won't go down that rabbit hole, but if it is, you've got to remember that there's a backside to it as well. And that we talked earlier about, the Scrumhalves making a lot of movements, a lot of passes off balance and everything, but also being able to stay strong in contact. Ed mentioned early on about getting bumped and, ending up with their backside on the ground. They've got to make sure that it's not just working the back with the front, but also getting them to work together. Especially for those kicks, at least for rugby athletes, you look at a box kick and you think it's pretty acrobatic until you watch a mixed martial artist. But the balance and the stability, getting onto that single leg and keeping everything, close and tight, is something that, remembering that, there's a backside to everything, and you got to develop that all the same. Is equally important, as Ed said, to make sure that you get the brake system to go with the horsepower to accelerate. So
yeah, good one. Yeah.
But other than that, just to wrap up, we talked early on about some conditioning stuff. Obviously the number of accelerations that the scrum half is making throughout the game. I just kind of threw these up here: pro agility, the 3-cone drill, multiple repeat sprints. Actually, something I don't have an example of it, but Ed talked about it early on, kind of introduced early, was the med ball stuff. And I know when Ed and I first met, hearing his stories about working with the boxers, and actually, Ed's got an interesting story. I'll let him tell in a second, but the med ball work, in terms of learning how to use the lower body, how to connect the lower body with that rotational force. Ed, I'll let you kind of share the story of what Jesse's trainer said after his med ball circuits.
So when I first started with James, great track that we were at, had a nice big wall. So brought out a 4-kilo med ball, got done all the stuff. So we probably threw 200, 250 times that day. 10 different throws that I came up with, some really intense, some less intense, but I control the tempo So you're throwing it off the wall, I'm catching it, I'm delivering it back to you. So I control how fast and how hard you're going as I watch you fatigue and I start trying to challenge you. So I went down to the gym that day. I'm from the east side of Detroit. I'm used to being the only white guy places. Ain't no big deal. I walked into the gym. It's a predominantly Hispanic gym. Joe Souza, who's like the cut man of the world, was Ogati's cut man, De La Hoya's cut man, James's cut man. You know, cut men they're a breed. They keep the fighter in the fight, you know, after a big bad gash or anything. Joe comes out of his office and he's cussing up a storm at me. I look over and James's trainers, we call him the chief second, would be the number one trainer, his father. They were both looking at me. I see James up in the ring and he's like, can't pick his hands up. And his guys look at me, they're like, what the hell did you do to him? I'm like, you know, well, and I'm telling James, I'm like, you know, it'll get better. You know, I really expected you to be able to turn and get some torque out of you, not just, you know, slap with your hands, not just throw it with your arms. So that's why your arms are so fatigued. And he's like, no, I trust you and all that. But they moved the fight up a couple of weeks. Like, okay, so I adjusted some stuff. Well, these two guys, his dad and his chief second, they're just staring bullets through me. I slinked out of there about 4 inches off the ground, terrified to go back. A few weeks later, I went back in, and his chief second, Leo Zuniga, says, hey, did you guys stop all that stupid medicine ball shit? I was like, no, actually, we threw almost 500 throws today. Why? And he's got this big pad on that they use for, you know, for punching, so you don't hurt and all that. And he looked at me, goes, because I think he just broke my damn ribs through the pad. And James turns and looks at me, he goes, I understand what you mean now. I understand. And when we fought, I mean, and it's all great, but when we fought, he fought a guy named Ivan Robinson who had went 2 fights with Arturo Gatti and never got knocked down. And Gatti was an animal.
Yeah.
James knocked him down twice in the fight and then knocked his ass out. The only change that he ever had made in his training was the speed work, the plyos, and that medicine ball that I had him doing. That was the only change that he made in his training to take him to that level. And we fought on Lennox Lewis David Tua's undercard in Vegas, and we were supposed to be the fight before the main event. Lewis was watching James train. We were all training in one gym, this huge gym in Vegas. And Lennox Lewis actually made the fight promoters move James down 1 fight because he looked too damn good and would have shown up the main event. And that's the fight we fought Robinson on, and he just destroyed Ivan Robinson. So that med ball, and it kept alive by throws coaches and track coaches. It was out there in strength conditioning for quite some time. It was away for quite some time. I just got lucky when I went to UT San Antonio to go to school and coach, that the track coaches there were real big. We had a little tiny weight room, so you got to do something. But that explosiveness, that total body work that you get out of a med ball, that's another one. I mean, that's the one that you can take out to the field and find a wall, or you don't even need a wall, you need a partner, and get some great throws, get that, get the explosive dynamic, full body work, and put them back with a rugby ball doing rugby work, taking them out, doing some more work there, coming back in. Because I tell you what, in 30 to 40 minutes, I can bury you to where you're laying in a bloody, a sweaty pool of, on the track, crying for your mommy quickly with a 3 and a 4 kilo med ball. Doesn't take much. And
I'd probably only do 10 because then I wouldn't have to worry about the other 30. One thing that we didn't bring up also is it's a bit of an old rugby joke, but the most important part of, I think, of a scrum half is the 2 inches above his eyebrows. And it really is his ability to think.
Rugby IQ. And,
yeah, that's it.
And make these decisions, make these quick decisions and everything else. I mean, we look at, there you go. Things like this. When I went to Ranger School, you're fatigued, you're tired, you're hurting. and you're out there in the middle of nowhere, sweating your ass off, playing war games and learning, and then all of a sudden you get sat down with something like this concentration grid, a simple arithmetic paper where you have to concentrate, fatigued, tired, beaten down. 3 hours of uninterrupted sleep was all that they were required to give you, and by God, that's all you got. You learned how to take little cat naps and all that, but you had to learn how to focus on that. We don't take our weapon apart and put it back together because that weapon needs to be taken apart, but all the time. But you need to be able to do that little skill, that little work, and focus and concentrate on that while you're in those fatigue states. So when I do agility work, or even some speed work, I'll do a lot of, if I have cones set up, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 meters, I'll pull out and say, all right, we're going to shuffle here, back pedal, sprint to this cone, do this, do that, do this. I may put 4 or 5 things in there. All right, go. I'm not going to repeat it, mostly because I can't. I'm pulling it out of my rear end. But I want you to have to, while you're fatigued, I want you to have to be able to concentrate. I watched that with Coach Popovich. We would have these guys come off the floor. You got X amount of time to get your water in you, make sure there's no blood on the uniform, and he's got to talk. He's got to get you back out on the floor. You don't have a unlimited amount of time, and I need you to concentrate when you need to concentrate.
Yeah.
You've also got to have the willingness of the participant to perform to the best of his ability. Yeah. Right.
It
takes a special person to do that. Not everybody's willing to do that. I think Eamon, you can agree. We tried to break people at Ohio, especially with the sled, that 500-pound sled. At the beginning, no one, other than Alex Elkins, could push it in 1 minute. 40 meters, and at the end, even Sean Davis could do it.
It became a badge of honor that every player would stand there and help the guy. Look at his technique. The coaches, we wouldn't say a word. We would stand on the sideline and they would do it, and then or we'd say time, that's it, and then next guy would go in and he'd be ready to go, and it comes down to that trust. If you don't develop trust from your management team to your performance staff, to your playing staff, to the even down as far as the person who walks on the field with the water, if you don't have trust from top to bottom, you're going to fail. And I suppose as on the screen there, summarizing thoughts. This will be mine then while I'm talking. It's if you build a program, the time when Coach Barford and I worked together. Paul had an overview of everything, but he didn't micromanage you. He told you what to do. He had his expectations. If it wasn't what he expected or he wanted to change it, he'd do it. He'd tell you what to change. But that's it. He'd let you do it. But if you got to meet his expectations. So Coach Holmes knew what his expectations were. Coach Rooney would know what his management structures was, and Paul and Tom were really close with regards to logistics because that was Paul's role as director. But Paul and I, we were no doubt at all what our jobs were, and get on with it. Get on with it. And the players then had an understanding about what was required of us them as players, both in behavior and performance levels. And if it dropped, they knew. And we wouldn't. The one thing we didn't do is it never went in there screaming, because there was absolutely no point in doing it. You had to highlight it with video, with film. Coach Holmes would take them away and said, right, what happened? Why did we go wrong in the scrum? And the experienced guys would say this, and Paul would go, yeah, okay. Then we need to adjust this in the gym, or we need to adjust that in the gym. And then we'd go outside in the Astro and do something else, change the activity somewhat, that we're going to the field, do the lineouts differently, scrums differently, patterns of play differently. As I say, coach changed the game plan 4 weeks into the season, which is, I don't care what, if you did that with an MLR side, with a full professional side, and you walk in as the head coach 4 weeks in and go, all right, it hasn't worked for 4 weeks, we're changing everything. There'd be revolution. But for Ohio, it was like, yeah, let's go with it. Let's do it. because we built up that trust. And I think the trust comes from the man at the top, whether that's the owner, the CEO, and it works its way down. From a rugby point of view, as the director of rugby, I suspect that the director of rugby and the director of strength and conditioning would work hand in hand. I'm not sure how the hierarchy would work, but I would suggest that the director of rugby will be in charge of the strength and conditioning side of it. But the director of rugby has got no time to sit in the gym all day watching technique, and I think this is where I was so keen to do this, is that it is important. Coaches, rugby coaches, basketball coaches, we don't know everything, but we know people that do. And it's about keeping those communication channels open, having the trust, give them enough rope and say, look, go do what I want you to do. And then go along later and adjust it and fine tune it, but trust the people you have around you,
Eamon, I think you hit the thing on the head. There is that whatever the strength and conditioning coach and the coach, they've got to be on the same plane. So, for instance, we've talked about this, about the scrum half. I think the first thing you've got to do is, as a strength and conditioning coach or as a coach, is to sit down with that player and say, okay, what do you think this position requires?
Yeah.
Number two, all right, do you have these requirements? 3, okay, how are we going to go about getting them? And this is my program. As a strength and conditioning coach, you're going to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Is that okay with you? We can fine tune it. So that they know what the requirement is and they know that you're going to be put through it. You can't just show up and say, we're doing these, we're going to do these drills and we're going to lift like this now. And then tomorrow we're going to do this and that. It's got to be a planned program and a progression, and they've got to know, and you've got to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And to do that, it goes through all phases. I mean, it was like abject horror, me listening to Ed on your last podcast, of the lack of transparency between the S&C and the coaches. That's an absolute insanity. You've got to be in the same room. Okay.
Yeah.
Scrum half sucks because he can't pass. Fix it, right? Okay, how do I do that? We'll try this, this, and this. Okay, will that work, coach? Yeah. Okay, let's go on. And you go through that process. But it's got to be, as you said, I like this to be done to this player. He needs this. You go ahead and do it. That's not my expertise. That's yours. And if he's getting better, you'll see it. And if he's not, you'll see that too. And if he comes up to you and says, coach, I need to work on my kicking. Okay, well, is it a coachy? Is it a technical thing? Are you not strong enough? Let's sit down with the coaching staff and the S&C people and figure it out. You've all got to be on the same wavelength. Otherwise, none of this works.
Yeah.
And it's going to change. It's an evolving thing through the season. You're going to get stronger in some respects, and in some things you're going to get weaker because you've perhaps been trying too much. It's for the scrum half, we didn't bring up the whole point about being gobby and feisty and a major pain in the butt, which is part of being a scrum half. But I think once you get all those traits, once you get all those requirements, you just naturally evolve into being the biggest dickhead on the pitch. Because I've got this. I'm the man, right? The only other person who's worse than me is probably the 10. He's stolen your shampoo or something, but that's about it. But really, it's a tremendous position, scrum half, to play. If you're a good rugby player, I mean, you pull the strings. And many years ago, it used to be, I'm the scrum half, and in front of you, you've got 8 blind dogs, and I'm the only seeing eye dog. That's the way it was looked at, right? And you just move them around like a bunch of meat, and that was it. And at the end of it, they loved you, because if you tell them what to do, they will do it. If the communication is there, it's when they don't know what's going on and they have to think for themselves, basically. That's when you have a problem.
Culture starts at the top, doesn't it? It works its way down. Always does.
That's it.
Yes.
Absolutely. Sorry. So I'm done, Justin, with my summarizing
No.
thought.
I'm done with my summarizing. Hope it's
Fantastic.
useful.
Yeah.
Good.
I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me
Yeah,
too.
Really good.
so. All right.
All right.
Now, oh wait, where's the? Oh, there.